Ryan. You were just starting to tell me about a cool TED talk on parenting, and I'd love to jam about that. So you want to tell me about it?
Sure. Well, yeah, it ties into a topic we thought we'd chat about today. So it's called Why Parents Should Stop Blaming Themselves for How Their Kids Turn Out. And I was watching it. I have a good setup here. I like to do, two things at once when I can. Tony Robbins calls it no extra time net. So I get a workout on a bike. Well, this room is very multi-purpose. So I've got a spin bike here. So while I'm sweating it out on there, I can be watching some TED Talks on the TV here. So yeah, it's a good setup. But so yeah, this one caught my attention scrolling and checking it out. And I wanted to talk about it because there's parts of it I agree with, and there's parts of it that I'm like, really? And the premise ultimately is that there's so many factors that can affect how a kid turns out that parents, I think her point, well, we can talk about this, but I think her point is we don't need to put so much weight on ourselves and feel so stressed when things don't go the way we want them to for our kids or they don't turn out the way we think. The quote let me just pull up this quote here. The quote from her TED Talk is trying to predict how a child will turn out based on choices made by their parents is like trying to predict a hurricane from the flap of a butterfly's wings.
So I can see that two ways as you read that. So one, it's very hard to predict. Also, is it also an inevitability? We may not know when, we may not know how, we may not know where, but we know it'll happen.
Yeah, I think, as I watched it and it got me thinking and I look back over here and yeah, I mean there's layers to what let me just pull up her name here for a second so I can give her some creds. Yuko Munakata PhD. Yeah, I felt like there was layers to it. Like she's not saying we're completely off the hook. That, but what she's saying is yes, the butterfly flapping its wings. I mean, she pulled out the butterfly effect. So, the butterfly flapping its wings in China can create a hurricane 6 weeks later in Florida. So, we do have an effect, and but it's so, you know, it's hard to know what specific part of what we're doing is going to ultimately influence this hurricane that is a child and as a force of nature.
Yeah, I think about it is one concept and idea that I teach in my speaking program is when as you're speaking to an audience, like very similar, like I cannot control the audience or what they're going to get out of it, or if I'm making an offer, like how many people are going to take that offer, how many people are going to take action on the ideas that they learned. But my intention is that. So the idea is high intention, low attachment. So the intention is to transform lives. The intention is to get this presentation into these people, to move their hearts. But if it does or doesn't happen, that's not up to me. I mean, I control the part that I can control, and that's it. So I think it's like very very similar. Like there's a lot of things that my kids, yet our kids do, like when they're around us. I find the more and more that they're around me, the more and more they do things like me. Like they have these, even like I classically talk with my hands a lot. And I know that's a little bit of a cultural thing, being a French Canadian. Also, like the way that I move my hands though is almost identical to the way my dad moves his hands. It's nuts. When I'm standing in a group, sometimes I will stand and I'll have like my hand on my side. Like if I have a drink in my hand or something like that, I'll have my other hand like just on my side. But the way that I have it on my side is usually like my wrist is bent back and it's on my waist like that. And my wife noticed that that's exactly how my dad does it. She's like, "Oh, you look just like your dad." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." It was like, so I picked up little mannerisms, picked up little things from my dad, just being in that environment. Now I don't do everything like my dad, so I can see it's like, yeah, like what am I going to pick up and what am I not? Like that's not determined, but there'll be some things, and even like the butterfly, like the concept of the butterfly effect is like we don't know, like small things can have big effects, but the fact is that small things still have some effect. There's still something that comes from it. It's not just like nothing is created, but we just don't know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, she's suggesting that, and she's referencing some meta studies that were done, where the they studied many studies, so the meta study, right, the study of many studies,
Hmm.
of, for example, 14 million twins in 39 countries, and
Wow.
measuring all these different outcomes. So I guess one of her conclusions is just there's so many other factors, genes, culture, their peers, teachers. I mean, there's so many other as they get older, environment, how important that is. But just there's all these other factors that she's saying can end up perhaps turning them out a different way than you thought based on, oh, I, sent them to this great school and yet they turned out to be like this. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, I think about like for my kids, like I know that I've had some challenges, particularly with my older one, in that like she sometimes does not display resilience the way that I think she could, and it like breaks my heart. Excuse me, it breaks my heart sometimes to see her give up or to see her just like really feeling down about something that she didn't feel like she did well at, or that we're playing a game and she didn't score as many goals, or that she lost at Candyland or whatever, and it produces like this big emotion. Whereas I'm like, okay, like it's just a game. And so I remember thinking about some things, and like I'm like, where does this come from? Like I don't know how she got this, right? Like just say like as we're talking, and I think at a certain level, for me, and I don't know if this is possible or not, but I thought like what are the things that regardless of what happens to her or where she is or how she turns out, like are there some things that I can really instill? Like are there some like a couple like really really important things? Like if nothing else, this is what I want her to get. And one thing that I know that from the moment she was born, that I did have done my best to instill, that I feel like she does so well, is kindness. Just the idea of kindness. I will always point out the the times when she was kind, the times when someone else was not or was, and like that's like a highlight. And for both my kids, like we always talk about, like above all else, be kind. That when someone is treating you badly, that we take the upper hand and treat them kindly, because we don't know what that other person is going through, and that ultimately people are good. Like everybody in this world is good at the the depths of their heart. They're a good person, and if they're not acting nicely, if they're acting mean, if they're doing something bad, it's not because they're bad. That's a behavior, and that we should always be kind. And my daughter is like super kind, like redonk kind. I love it. And I think, oh, like that's something that we tried really hard to instill. So I'm curious, like I wonder if there are things that are easier to instill, harder to instill. What's your take on that? What do you think?
Well, that's a really good question. Yeah, like I was just reflecting back on when we had our first. I remember thinking this around like, this would have been what, 15 years ago now. Um, like growing up in a world now for her with the internet and now with AI, like all of this information available to them at their fingertips. I just remember, in the world that she's going to grow up in, what is going to be really important, right? Like as you were saying, like what are those essential things I'd want to do my best to try and instill in them? And so I do go to a place of like values, like in terms of like what are those values? Like, what are those, foundational things that will serve them no matter, what they decide to choose, what path they decide to choose in life. So kindness is a great one. I remember thinking about like kindness, loving, like just that character. Like I felt like how important just their character is going to be in this world if information and what they need to know is always at their fingertips. I felt like resourcefulness, like being able to problem solve, like basically empowering them to know that they can figure things out on their own,
Mm-hmm.
was also for me going to be really important. I mean, yes, you can go and type in a lot of stuff, but not to outsource your thinking, right? To empower them. We've talked about this before on a previous podcast, like just how important empowerment, and I guess I would connect resourcefulness to that, like just knowing that I should be able to figure this out. And I guess, there's a slippery slope there where it can get into that fixed mindset of like, oh, they say, don't call your kids smart because you don't want to give them this fixed label that, oh, why can't I figure this out? Well, there must be something, anyways. But resourcefulness can also mean like, well, I guess maybe I'm not the best at figuring this out. Maybe somebody else will be. And so I guess, yeah, I put a lot into resourcefulness. Um, and then I also just, another thought on this TED talk was, as I was watching it, the one of the perspectives I felt like she had and these studies have is, oh, well, they were looking at twin pairs and why do, with the same parents in the same household, the twins turn out to be totally different. Well,
Mm.
and it also just talks about, you could be having two different kids, again, your firstborn, your second kid, and they're going to turn out to be very different with the same parents. But I'm like, well, of course, like, part of this is assuming that like kids with the same parents are going to turn out the same way, but you know, you don't want them to, right? Like there's of course this very unique essence to each kid. And I think for me one of the important messages to take away from this is like don't apply the same I mean, so values that we're talking about I think is really important to know for yourself and instill as much as you can independent of the kid, but then
Mm-hmm.
also respecting that each kid's going to have their own unique attitude and their own unique character and their own unique way that they want to express themselves in the world. And so your parenting is going to need to flex based on those parents. Like I totally parented our firstborn daughter very differently than our secondborn son. Like they were just very unique individuals in terms of how they show up in the world. So I can it's kind of like I watched this and I read back on it again. I'm like, well, of course they're going to turn out different, like the two different twins. Like you know,
Yeah.
I, I wouldn't want them to turn out the same.
Yeah. I guess, yeah. And what you're saying, I think is very true. Like what is the same, like you want to instill your value, like the values that they learn and the values that they display, yet how they learn those values, how they embody those values can be very different. So like I think it's like anything, like having a goal in business. Like I have a goal to reach this outcome, and then so you develop a strategy to get there, but that strategy doesn't necessarily always work. So you can do one of two things. You could just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, trying to expect that you'll somehow miraculously get a different result by doing the same thing after some period of time, which Einstein said was the definition of insanity. Or you can keep the outcome, but change the way that you get there. Just like if I was to drive from here to downtown, if there's an accident on the Lionsgate Bridge, one of the two bridges that I can take to get into the city, well, I can just sit there and wait until hopefully it clears up again. Or I can remap, reroute, and take the other bridge, even though it might take me a little bit longer, but I'll still get to my destination. And if the point is the destination, then it shouldn't really matter how I get there. That I can be flexible about. So I think it's very,
Yeah,
very similar with the kids. Like if we're trying to,
yeah,
and for us as parents, like it's important for us to realize that, and this is for sure something I need to learn much, much better, is that how I parent both my kids can and probably should be very different in the approaches. Like I can't just be a robot to both of them and expect that, going to get the same result with them.
Right. Right. Yeah. Total. I think that's one of my big takeaways is just to, appreciate. And I think I do like that each kid is going to be unique and that, yeah, like you're saying, my parenting needs to flex to meet them where they're at. I feel like that's an important part of, it's one thing I like about the sort of primary school, the first school my kids have gone to. The role of that, their teaching style is a little different. Their goal as teachers is to meet the kids where the kids are at, not trying to put the kids into a system. So I think that's one takeaway I have from this TED Talk is don't just have a parenting system like, oh, this worked. This is the way I'm going to parent. And I'm going to parent each kid the same way. And these are the outcomes I want for them because I think that's important. I think I can see in the comments here on this TED Talk too, is that's one of the other big misses is making sure that you're, again, adapting your parent to meet the kid where they're at, to really honor and see what the unique expression is that they want to bring forth and not try and put our needs on the kid, versus making sure that we're adapting ourselves to meet their needs.
Mm-hmm. And then again, I think with that, there then is also, I mean, that's the spectrum, but there's also that spectrum has a limit as well. Like we've talked about before, like these parents who are, it's like, well, whatever the kid is going through, whatever they're doing, they're just going to do. And, and sometimes when the child, and even as adults, like that's the other thing. I always find it's fascinating that we're talking about, we spend so much time talking about the things for our kids and like how to parent and things like that. Yet, and we can 100%, or for me anyways, I can 100% take 100% of all the things we're talking about and apply them to myself. And I would, become a much better person because of it. And we somehow think, I somehow think like, well, I'm this like all-knowing being, or I'm so much smarter than my kids in many ways. But I'm like, really, like we're also just trying to parent and oftentimes reparenting ourselves, because of things that we have learned either great and not so great from our childhoods. And yeah, and it then brings in like the idea of so the butterfly flapping its wings and the effect that has. So you're taking a grown adult who's also trying to figure life out, and having them trying to help this other person trying to figure their life out. And then you just throw a second kid in the mix. Oh, then never mind. But there's also the spouse, right. And there's also their parents, and there's our parents, and yeah, it becomes so complex that we try to make it like, we'll try to narrow things and kind of box things in so that we can, I think, just so that we can really cope. Sometimes so we feel like we have some sort of understanding, we have some sort of level of certainty. Like Tony Robbins talks about the six human needs, and the first four needs are the needs of the ego, or the needs of the personality. Number one is a need for certainty and comfort. Like we need to know, like we need to understand that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And we need to have that some sort of level of like, okay, we know what's going to happen moment to moment. But then the flip side of that, the second need is a need for variety or uncertainty. And then from there, we have our need for significance. We have our need for connection and love. And then the last two needs, we says the needs of the spirit, which are growth and contribution. And so many of us, we're stuck in meeting our needs in ways that aren't necessarily productive, aren't necessarily healthy. But as he teaches, I mean, we will meet our needs no matter what. And when we do things, the more of our needs, especially the first four, the more that it meets our needs, the things that we do, the more it becomes more of an addiction to do it. Like the more we're compelled to do these things because they're meeting so many of our needs. And I feel like half of my adulthood has been learning better ways to meet those basic those basic needs of my mind, those needs of my personality. And I look back and think, man, like I had great parents. I feel like I lucked out. Like I hit a freaking lottery with my parents. Like amazing. Yet I also know like they are human. I remember the moment. I think I was 20, 21, 22 years old. And I remember going to see my parents. They were living in Colorado at the time, and sitting down with them. And one of them was going through something. I can't remember the details of it, but it was just like the moment I remember, like, oh, like my parents are human. Like I saw them more in the moment. I saw them more as peers as I did like child and parent, because I was actually helping them out with something. Like, so it was like a big thing. And I'm like, oh, like we're all just like in this together now. Okay, let's go. And and I think part of what the other thing I get out of the talk that you were mentioning, even though I haven't watched it, is that we just need to give ourselves some grace. Like we're all just trying to figure this out. And if our kids don't turn out exactly the way that we expect in a moment, I'm like, okay, that's okay. Like life's not over yet. I firmly believe in the axiom of, in the end, it's going to be all okay. So if it's not okay, it's not the end.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the word that I pulled out of this too, is grace, right? You could do everything that you wanted to, you could have done your absolute best, and they still turn out different than you think, right? I think that's one of the layers of the messaging in here is like, don't have this fixed expectation for how things are supposed to go, because we do have a profound, but like the butterfly wing still affects the fact that there is a hurricane, according to her analogy here. I think the point is that yes, we do have an impact in a subtle yet powerful way, and how we want to show up and how we want to flap our wing as the butterflies is super important. And our kids are a force of nature, and there's going to be so many other factors that are out of our control, that yes, that is to give ourselves some grace, that we can't control how things are going to go.
Yeah, I find that really hard sometimes when I see, especially when I see my kids struggle with things. That becomes hard, and I know I've mentioned this before, but like I have a hard time sometimes recognizing like when to intervene, when to let them struggle, when to like yeah, like when to be the helicopter parent, when to be the laissez-faire parent, when to be all of those things. And I think sometimes it's just in the moment, like the place that I'm in within myself will determine the type, what I do. Yet I also know that the more that I do things, and we bring this back all the time, like the more that I do things for myself to build resilience, the more that then I can, not that I can expect it of my child, but the more that it becomes a possibility that I can allow for that. And if I feel like I'm weak and I'm not resilient and I'm this and I'm that, I can't teach that. I can't teach that to my kid, because I am just the embodiment of whatever it is that I am. And if I'm trying to teach something, then I better embody it first.
Yeah. I feel, yeah, again, it's a great place to bring this back to in terms of like our own self and our own personal growth. I heard you say that before, just in our last chat there. It's just around how important that self-awareness is, as a parent. Well, that's being a big part of your journey, I know, and mine as well, is to be the best possible dad, husband, man. I don't have everything I need possibly, or I haven't learned everything I need to know. Going on our own personal growth journey, being able to take this information that we learn and be able to self-reflect on and go,
Yeah.
how does this apply to myself? And like in those moments that you're talking about too, is like not just what does my kid need and what do they really need, right? Like not what do they want, like you were saying too, that kid who's having a meltdown on the plane.
Yeah.
Like they want something, but is that really what they need?
Yeah.
Maybe the kid who's having a meltdown right now needs some comfort. Maybe they need some safety. Maybe they need some help with emotional control. Maybe they need some help co-regulating. Maybe they need, but in order to know that, we also have to understand what we need, right? Like if we weren't given that, and if we don't even realize that that's important for us, if we're also having a tantrum at the same time, or we've shut down emotionally because we can't handle this because we never got the attention or help co-regulating when we were a kid. Basically, what yeah, I'm hearing from you, and I've also realized is to make sure that we take the time to understand what we need and actually know that there are some things and it's okay to have some things that we need. Like that word need is one that I've struggled with in the past. Like I don't want to be needy, but that there are things that we as humans, and just given our own upbringing, that we might not have got that we want, that we need to give some time and some space and some energy to be like, yeah, I do need that. I do need a hug every once in a while. I do need some help right now regulating myself because I am upset about this. So that I just think that yes, going on our own journey of self-awareness is super important in terms of being able to better parent and handle what's coming up in front of us.
Mm-hmm. Like I think about years ago hearing a story from Nathaniel Brandon, he's written a cajillion books. He used to be, back in the day, this is like way back in the day, side note, he was one of the young lovers of Ayn Rand, who wrote The Fountainhead and all those kind of seminal books. But he's referred to as the godfather of self-esteem. Like he wrote a bunch of books about, so one of them is The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. He really wrote a lot about that and kind of really started that whole movement about self-esteem. And in his book, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, one of the pillars is self-responsibility. So like we are responsible for ourselves. No one else is. And one day he was giving a lecture somewhere, and he was talking about self-responsibility. And he said, like one of his ideas he was trying to get across was that no one is coming to save you. No one is coming. It's up to you. And at the break, a woman came up and was talking to him. And he said, "Oh, like I have a question for you." And he's like, "Okay, what's up?" And he said, "Well, you're talking about how like no one is coming to save you." He's like, "But you came. But you're here for us." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I came to tell you that no one's coming to save you." That was so good. But it's so true. Like we're like, regardless of what we do, like it's up to us. And there's so many things that have happened to me. And even though like I find it so fascinating that, like I just said, I feel like I hit the lottery when it comes to my parents. Like I love my parents so deeply and dearly. And man, like I couldn't imagine life without them. And, having grown up in another family, like I love it. And I know that it wasn't perfect. And when I look back, there's probably some things that I am looking at through rose-colored glasses that may or may not have been good or whatever. Excuse me. But even with all that, I have somehow learned and not learned some of the values that they tried to instill. There are some things like I still have like traumatic things that I'm dealing with. I still have all these like weird quirks and fears and idiosyncrasies about me that like, where did that come from? Like that, I think like, well, clearly that didn't come from my parents because they were awesome, but maybe some of them did. I don't know. And now as an adult, it can be so easy. And this is something that I know that I coach people through, as well as I'm always trying to coach myself through, is that we may not be at fault for what happened to us, but we are 100% responsible for it. And I believe that like when I came to that realization, when I first learned that on a conscious level, that was like I was like, oh, okay. Like there was actually a lot of weight taken off. I feel like it became easier because then there wasn't something that was outside of me that I could point to, but I didn't quite understand. But now I could just like, no, well, I'll just start with where I am. And this is just me and I'm responsible. So like, fuck it, let's go. You know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, just even in your own example, right? Where, some of the things that about yourself that's like, wow, this isn't working for me, but my parents are really good. I mean, to the point of her TED Talk here is that you might have picked it up somewhere completely different.
Yeah.
Your parents were the butterfly wings. They did the best they could, and you and I, we picked up stuff along the way from a whole bunch of other factors. My science teacher, my hockey coach, my best friends that I hung out with in high school. Like, there's so many other influences along the path there, that ultimately shaped who I ended up becoming. And there is this whole innate self that is there as well to respect, that has that's completely independent of anything externally.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's also something to be said about, the things that we do as parents, the environment that we provide, all those things ultimately we may not be able to predict exactly, but there's a higher likelihood of so many things. Like I think like this is somewhat tangentially related, but like the story of Bill Gates. I have lots of feelings about Bill Gates, but just his story of like him coming up as like him being the chief executive of Microsoft and him like starting that company, like just the fact that he was just the fact that he grew up in the Pacific Northwest in the US, just the fact that he lived mere kilometers away from the schools and where they had the resources and they had the computers where he could tinker on and test things, like that couldn't have happened in the middle of Nigeria. That couldn't have happened in the middle of Hong Kong. That couldn't have happened in the middle of Sydney, Australia. That couldn't have happened up here in Vancouver. But he just happened to be right there. And so that allowed for that possibility. And I think about like how many of those things, like, yeah, like we cannot predict like what's going to happen, but like there are some things that we know, like in the environment that we provide for our kids is important, and it may not be, yeah, like we don't know exactly how that's going to turn out, but I think just having the resourcefulness to provide kids with things that further their passions or further their curiosities, I think is something to go with. Like I think about like your son William. I mean, with his skiing. I mean, he's got a rare opportunity, and whether that's something that he developed a passion for it because of him doing it, or he just happened to do it and like that, like it just brought something out inside of him that was already there, or was it created because it was like, who knows? But it happened, and you're nurturing it, which is amazing.
Yeah, well, you bring up a good point there. In her example of the butterfly wings in China make this hurricane in Florida. It seems like we have this small, but again, potentially very important role in how all this can turn out. At least an influence. But as you're saying too, is there are some big things that we can decide that, maybe the butterfly doesn't need to be in China. Like if you move the butterfly to North America, all of a sudden that could have a very different outcome, and maybe the hurricane does look quite different and shows up in Europe. You know what I mean? Like what
Right.
you're talking about is you can, as a parent, make some very big decisions and have some big choices that can have a very much greater probability. I'm hearing you say in terms of how things turn. I totally agree with that. Like if and I go back to this book a lot, Essentialism, because there's a great exercise in there about reflecting back on your ancestors and some of the choices
Mm.
that they made, that like think about your life today, and some of the choices that our ancestors made, like holy cow, like some of those are massive in terms of how I turned out. Like
Hmm.
if my great grandparents didn't come to Canada, then my entire life, maybe I'm not even here. You know what I mean? Like, so there are some.
Right.
I think there are some big things. Like the point I took away from that book was, man, what are the choices I do want to make and decisions I want to make sure I make in this life that could have a profound influence on my grandchildren and great grandchildren.
Mm.
So I do think, yeah, to maybe counter her point a little bit, or maybe it's somewhere in there, is you're right. There are some big things that we need to decide for ourselves and for our families that definitely could have, again, a strong likelihood in terms of influencing how they turn out.
Yeah. What about this idea of fate, or the difference between fate and like things become self-determined? Where am I going with this? I think about when we talk about grace, like the decisions that have been made, the things that we've done so far. I spend so much time trying to imagine, especially when when things don't go the way that I want, or things have not happened the way that I wanted, or things I feel like I made a mistake. I would dwell so much on that, as opposed to just thinking, well, no, today happened. Today is today. It happened. Like my grandparents did move from France to Canada, 2 generations ago. Like that happened. I can't do anything about that. I can't do anything about what I did today to my kid. There's no way I can undo that, but I can do something to potentially rectify it for the future. And I think when I get lost in the past, or lost in the regret, or lost in the guilt of the things that I've done, or the remorse, then I become paralyzed in feeling like I even can create something different for my family, or can create something different for my kids. But when I say, well, it just, whatever happened, happened. Like if it could have happened any different, it would have, but it didn't. And so I was, I'm juggling what is like predetermined or self-determined, and what is no, like, no, you actually have the power to change this. Like, well, if I could have done it different, I would have. Well, maybe I was lazy. Maybe I was procrastinating. Maybe I wasn't thinking straight. Like maybe, you know, but yet in that moment, maybe I was just doing the best that I could with what I had. And I guess it comes back to what I was saying earlier about high intention, low attachment. I have the intention to always be great, always be perfect, always be not perfect, but just always do my best. And knowing that my best is a sliding scale.
Right.
It's not a constant.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah. It's like every day I get a reminder how I know we talk about a lot of the same books quite repeatedly, and we should compile a list one of these days. The four agreements, one of them being always do
Mm-hmm.
your best, is just, and like last night came up again, don't make assumptions. There's so many, I mean, you could just study that one book and practice it, and your life would be extraordinarily better. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, your best, it's interesting, right? I think from what I'm hearing you saying is your best isn't always the same. Like even I might have had a better me yesterday that I do today. Like if I didn't sleep well, or um, not exercising or whatever, like my best can change over time. And so to not give yourself a hard time about that, because in the moment you did your best, like you did, ideally, like you did what you did, and you can't change that. As soon as that moment's gone, you can't change it. So it's done. Like to be able to accept that. And then all you've got is this moment right now to again bring forward your best. I guess, you know, what I'm thinking of when you're saying that is like, yeah, how do I continue to evolve my best so that it's ideally getting better at the same time as, yeah, I don't, it's an interesting concept around. Well, and I guess the other part of what I heard you say there is, well, what I thought I heard you saying around fate is, how much do I influence, um, or how much is predetermined? And, you can start to get into we haven't talked much. I know we both have done work and gone into the realms of, sort of the spiritual religious elements of this, but is that where
Hmm.
you're also talking about in terms of how much is predetermined?
Well, yeah, and I guess the predetermined in that. Well, I did just do that action. Like if something happened, I ate. I'm trying to cut or change my body composition, and so I'm trying to take away fat from my body, and I'm trying to build muscle in my body. And I just ate half a chocolate cake. Like, well, I've just determined there's something that's going to be determined because of that action. I can't go back and change that. I wish I wouldn't have done that. So, but in the present, they're like, well, something happened that's going to determine something moving, like in the near future, maybe not in the far future. And maybe, I mean, maybe that's it. As I'm thinking about it, as we're talking about it, maybe our time horizons are part of the problem. Like, I may not be able to determine the level of resilience that my daughter has in the next like month, but potentially my impact can have a much greater impact if I look at it over the next 10 years. And so what's my, yeah, like what am I looking at? Where's my time horizon? Like anybody, people that I follow and study for stuff with business, like Alex Hormozy talks about, yeah, like people are always looking at it way too short term. If you can start to, like, the longer your time horizon can be, the more advantage you then have, because you're not just trying to get the short term win. You're not trying to find the thing that's going to satisfy the desire or the goal right now. But if you can put that off, then much better. And I think it's very similar with our kids. Like, I may not be able to determine exactly what happens in this moment, but I'll have a much better chance much later.
Speaking of which, yeah.
Yeah, you're here.
Um, well, okay, here's a thought. Um, it's kind of on this is around how much you think of our life is predetermined. Like I know there's a whole notion of, in the spiritual realm of sacred contracts, like we've made an agreement even before this life, the things that we want to learn, maybe how we
Hmm.
want it to go. There's a whole book on that. I haven't read it, but how much do you think, yeah, of our life is predetermined versus how much we get to shape, like you were saying back before there as well. There's no one coming to save us. Like we've actually predetermined all of it, some of it, you know, well ahead of time.
Yeah, I don't know where I land. I don't know where I land on that. I think I land more on the, like, none of it matters except this very moment. Like, even if it was predetermined, like, even, yeah, like, it won't matter. If I stand in the middle of the road, I will get hit by a car. Like, even if I'm pointed in the right direction, I'm trying to go north, I'm facing north, but if I just sit there, then I'm not going anywhere. So yeah, like, it doesn't matter. Like, yes, maybe it was predetermined that I was born in Winnipeg. Maybe it was predetermined that I was supposed to meet this one person that you and I met at our friend Suki's house all those years ago. And maybe all that was predetermined. But, like, okay, and now what?
Right. We still have choice in every moment, whether I get up, whether I sit down, whether I go out in the road, whether I don't. Um, well, how about yeah, there's just two other thoughts. One is there is this really thought-provoking YouTube video called The Egg.
Okay,
Have you seen this one? So
I'm not sure if I have. It doesn't sound familiar.
it,
Tell me about it.
so there's a couple different versions of it. The one I like, it's kind of grainy. It's made many years ago, but it's got real live actors. Don't watch the cartoon one. There's real live actors. But the idea is that maybe everything in our life isn't predetermined. Like, we do have choice. But I also think of it like a video game where we've got levels and lessons that we need to we're meant to learn, or we get to learn to be able to advance to the next level. But if
Hmm.
we don't, then we're just going to keep playing the same level again. Like I have choice. I have skills. I can, work on myself. I can get better at things and I can ascend, or I can get to this next level. And the egg video is kind of the same thing, is that we are going to have multiple lives to try and figure some of this stuff out.
Hmm.
And if we don't, it's kind of like Groundhog Day. You're just going to keep repeating the same lesson. But
Right.
anyways, I just throw that out there in terms of a whole other thought is, do we, maybe it's not predetermined, but do we get to learn important key things in our own lives that will help us, will help the next generation? I don't know. What do you think?
Hmm. Well, I I think about, well, so that idea of the video game, like if you're playing, say, like the old style video games were programmed in such a way that it was like there was the program rules, and then there was the player, and the program always did the same thing, and your job was to recognize those patterns and to get around to, to be able to get around them. Like every time that there was a a bad guy, they would act in the same way. So you had to figure out all of that. But now when things get more complex, like now with the more complexity, or the greater complexities in the games, you've now got multiplayer games. So you're not only dealing with whatever the program rules are, but then you're also dealing with, you're at the whim of other players as well. And the more that you add, the more things that you add that you're not necessarily, you don't know what they're going to do, then that adds more complexity to what you may need to figure out to try to get to where you want to be. And yet, that brings me to the thinking of like the Matrix, when Neo talks about, like, to Agent Smith, that all, or and Morpheus as well, that all of those things are based upon like a programmed set of rules. You did not do that, and you may or may not have to follow or abide by any of those rules. Sometimes we know that there's something greater than any of those things. And I think one of those things, we touched on it before, is this idea of grace. Like, it's a weird thing. It's a weird, like, how do sometimes when I feel like I've messed up so much, or I've done the greatest mistake, or I've, like, oh my God, like it's unforgivable, yet, like, I'm still here, yet people still love me, yet people still support me, yet I have more opportunities, like, yet I get to try again. Like, sometimes it doesn't make sense.
Hmm.
But the idea of grace seems to supersede any of those things. Like, it's the meta rule. It's the meta thing that kind of, and so I don't know. I think, yeah, grace above all, kindness above all. That there's nothing in life that both of those things won't help. So
Yeah.
if that is just as at the foundation, those are the base rules. Like, those are the base actions and intentions. Then everything else, I think, sets itself up better. So I think for all of us, like, the more that we create a foundation for good in our life, the more that we create a foundation for bringing up our kids in a good way, giving them opportunities, giving them things to allow for their curiosities, like those foundational things, then we can build something big. But we have to think about those things. Like, those are not things that are just given. And I think things become predetermined and things become predestined when we don't intervene consciously in our lives. Like, life is going to happen to us if it's not like, if we don't make it happen for us. That's how I think about it.
Big, some some great reflections, some big thoughts. Well, and I
Just wait
think
till I have my second cup of coffee.
yeah, I was just thinking about the video game analogy again. Is as you're saying too, the games have evolved to the point where sometimes there isn't a point left in the game. Like you're just running around with a bunch of other people in the game doing stuff and collecting stuff, but there really isn't this. So back in the day, right, there was more of a linear model to the game, right? You needed to advance the next level, next.
Yeah.
But as you were saying that they've evolved where they're complex, they're social. There's a whole different point maybe or there isn't even a point necessarily in terms of like a linear progression to get to an end goal. But then, I think as you're saying there, like taking a step back and thinking about, well, what is really important here? Like, is it to progress and have this sort of linear model of success? Is it to try and collect as much stuff in the game? If you just take a step back and think of, wait a second, I'm the one playing here. What do I really want from this game? Like,
Hmm.
and I'm hearing you say, like, taking that time to take a step back and go, how do I really want to show up as a parent? How do I really want to play this game? How important do I want to make certain things? As you're saying, grace, kindness. Um, like maybe the point here is to just have fun playing this game and do my best at how I'm playing it, and not be swearing at it and throwing my controller against the screen, but like,
Yeah.
yeah, like enjoying it, like being able to take it all in and to have some grace as again, I'm using it as an analogy, but like this can be a game. This can be fun. We can take a step back and go, how do I want to play this?
Right. Yeah. I love that idea of this whole thing is just a game. And when I can, and I don't do this often, but I think what I'm taking away from today, what I want to incorporate into my own life is to treat things more like a game in that when I wake up in the morning, I'm a new man. I maybe my character died yesterday, but today, I wake up and I've got the same. Yeah, maybe I'm doing the same level, but I'm maybe doing the same level, but with now I know a little bit more of the patterns of which. I know how I can get around the bad guy now. I can now or now. I've got the next boss, the next big boss that I've got to overcome, and that it can just be fun. Like that it's not determined like, just because I didn't pass the level yesterday doesn't mean that I won't today, because today's it's a fresh opportunity. It's a fresh life.
Well, it reminds me of, have you seen has there been a remake? The original Groundhog Day with Bill Murray,
Yeah, yeah, right.
right? For me, it was such a great, what lesson in terms of like things, if you let them, you can wake up every morning and be like, oh, same bed, same coffee, same whatever, right? Like you
Hmm.
could have you can choose to have a certain attitude about your day, and it can feel very monotonous and very repetitive and living it over and over and over again. Or as you were just sharing, as you spawn in for a new day, as he learns through the movie, spoiler alert, is, oh, maybe I can just have a whole different perspective, even though all the things are the same. And
Yeah,
I can choose to see them totally different. I can choose to enjoy, every part of it if I want. And look what happens. Things all of a sudden start to change, because of my, I'm not sitting there waiting for them to change, hoping they're going to change, as this sort of passenger and letting life happen to me, as I heard you say too. It's, no, this is a life I get to live. This is a game I get to play. This is life I get to live. No one's coming to save me. Okay, how do I want to wake up? How do I want to live each moment as I go through the day? And yes, as you were saying too, it's not always something we're conscious of, and sometimes yeah, I can definitely do a better job of remembering that. And when I do, boy, it leads to a much more enjoyable experience.
yeah, man. I think it's a great place to leave off for today. I like it.
Yeah, some good movies to watch, some good books to
Yeah,
read. Uh, Ultimately comes down to like, right, yeah, right now, moment to moment. How do we want to show up
awesome, man.
as being a dad?
It's a fun game to play. I'm glad I'm playing it.
Fun and has its moments of frustration too. Yes.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, have a great day. And we'll see
All
you
right.
next time.
You too. All right. Ciao.